I knew something inside me had cracked the moment I heard the words, delivered without hesitation, without care. I am tired of seeing you. It was Christmas Day, a day meant for warmth, yet the cold in that sentence cut deeper than any winter wind. It was the kind of hurt that does not scream but sinks, slow, heavy, undeniable. And as I stood there, realizing I had become a stranger in the very home I built, something shifted. Sometimes a single moment is enough to end a chapter, enough to make you walk away not out of anger, but out of awakening. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you will not want to miss. Let us get started. I returned home on Christmas afternoon with the sharp Vermont air still clinging to my coat, the kind that carries the taste of snow and pine. Stowe always smelled the same this time of year. Even after decades of winters, the cold still knew how to slip into my bones before the house warmed me again. When I stepped inside, the scent of cinnamon and old wood greeted me, familiar and grounding. The tree in the corner glowed softly with warm lights, casting patterns across the floorboards that my late husband, Daniel, had installed with his own hands. Yet something about the air felt strangely hollow, as if the house itself were holding its breath. This home had been my anchor for more than 30 years. Daniel and I had built it board by board, saving from each paycheck, learning to become our own carpenters. After he passed, I paid off the mortgage alone, marking each payment in the worn notebook I kept tucked inside a leather box. My name stood alone on the deed. I never thought much about it until recently. Now that small detail felt like the last piece of ground that was truly mine. I hung my scarf on the hook by the door and looked around. Everything appeared orderly. The garland draped neatly across the mantel. The stone fireplace glowed with a low flame. The tin of ginger cookies I baked 2 nights before still sat on the counter. But the house was too quiet, empty in a way that did not match the season. The quiet pressed in on me, heavier than usual, unsettling in its weight. My son, David, had once chased happiness through every room of this place. As a child, he had run down the hallways laughing, diving behind my legs during thunderstorms, gripping my hand as the windows rattled. Growing up here had shaped him, yet adulthood had left him drifting. Jobs came and went, ambitions flickered and burned out. 3 years ago, he had asked to move back just until things settled, and I opened my door without hesitation. I did not think about rent. I only thought about being a mother. Claire, his wife, had followed shortly after. She was polite in the way people are when they want something, but do not want to appear as if they want it. With her neat clothes, measured voice, and eyes that scanned a room more than they occupied it, she carried herself like someone always calculating for the next step. She worked in interior sales, and I often caught her glancing at walls or fixtures as if mentally replacing them. I felt it every time she entered a room. The smallest shift in temperature, a brief tightening of the air, nothing harsh, just a presence that never fully softened. As I walked toward the living room, I noticed details that should have been comforting, but were not. David's boots were near the door, lined up too neatly. A mug sat half empty on the table, as if abandoned in a hurry. The staircase leading to the second floor seemed darker than usual. I could almost feel Claire somewhere above, not quite hiding, but not welcoming either. I set the grocery bag on the counter and paused. The lights on the tree reflected off the window, and for a moment I saw my own outline superimposed over the snow outside. I felt the lingering sense that I was standing on the edge of something I could not yet name. Something about the way the house held itself still told me that a shift was coming. My hand brushed the wooden banister Daniel had carved, tracing each groove he smoothed decades earlier. The warmth under my palm steadied me, but it did not quiet the unease building in my chest. I stood there, listening to the silence stretch across the rooms that once echoed with life, and I understood with a clarity I could not explain. Something was wrong, and it was waiting for me just beyond this moment. If you are still watching and this moment hits you as hard as it hit me while writing it, comment number 1 below so I know you are with me. Now, let us keep going into chapter 2. The moment I stepped farther into the living room, the weight of the silence grew heavier, settling across the house like a thick blanket of frost. The lights on the Christmas tree glowed in soft amber tones, but even their warmth could not soften the air between us. David stood near the stone fireplace, his arms folded tightly over his chest, shoulders stiff, as if bracing for a storm. The fire behind him cast shadows along the wall, stretching his figure into a version of himself I barely recognized. Above us, the old staircase creaked faintly, and I caught the familiar trace of Claire's perfume drifting down. She did not need to step into the room. Her presence had already shaped the atmosphere. I set the last of the groceries onto the counter and waited for David to speak. My son, once the boy who clung to me during winter nights when the wind howled against the windows, now avoided my gaze. I noticed the tension in his jaw, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, like a man wrestling with the words that did not belong to him. His voice finally cut through the silence, sounding hollow, rehearsed, and far older than his years. For a moment, the room stood completely still. The fire crackled behind him. The tree lights blinked in rhythm. Even the snow outside seemed to hold its descent. My breath caught in my chest, not from shock, but from understanding. I recognized the tone, the cadence, the unease. These were not David's words. They were delivered by his mouth, but shaped in someone else's hands. I studied him without reacting. There was a tremble in the corner of his left hand. His eyes kept drifting toward the staircase, which told me everything I needed to know. Claire was listening. She was always listening. She had a talent for it, quietly guiding conversations from shadows, shaping outcomes without ever placing herself in direct conflict. A soft footstep above confirmed she was standing just out of sight, waiting to hear whether her message had been delivered correctly. Inside me, something shifted. Not pain, not anger, something colder and far more steady. I felt it spreading through my chest like a quiet resolve. If this was the moment my son chose to draw a line between us, then he had chosen the wrong woman to challenge in her own home. I asked him a single question, gently, because gentleness often reveals truth better than force. His face tightened. He looked at the floor instead of at me. There was guilt there, but it was buried under the weight of someone else's expectations. I could almost picture Claire's hand on his back, pressing him forward. He continued speaking, giving explanations that sounded like they had been practiced. Claims about needing space, wanting independence, feeling crowded. Each excuse landed with the dull thud of dishonesty. I listened without interrupting, letting every word settle in the quiet room. Behind him, the fire gave off a soft hiss, as if even the flames disapproved. The irony of it all nearly made me laugh. In the house I built, where he had lived without paying rent for years, where every beam and every nail held memories of sacrifices made for him, he now stood as if I were the intruder. The thought did not hurt as much as one might imagine. Instead, it clarified everything. The Christmas lights reflected in the window pane, and in their faint glow I saw something unexpected. A version of myself not bowed by disappointment, but sharpened by it. Their request for space was not a request at all. It was a warning, and I understood warnings better than most. David shifted again, waiting for me to argue, to plead, to soften. Instead, I simply looked at him, then at the staircase where Claire lingered unseen. I felt a calmness settle into me, deep and cold, steady as the Vermont winter. This was the moment the house stopped feeling like a home and became something else entirely. Not a sanctuary, not a burden. Evidence. If you are still here and the tension is starting to pull you in, drop a number 2 in the comments so I can see who is following closely. Now, let us step into chapter 3. By the next morning, the house felt different, as if the quiet from the night before had seeped into the walls and settled there. I moved through each room with a sharper awareness, noticing small things I had overlooked for years. The way Claire's perfume lingered longer than usual in the hallway. The way David avoided eye contact over breakfast. The faint tension humming beneath the surface like a power line stretched too tight. Nothing had changed physically, yet everything felt altered. The air itself seemed to recognize that a line had been crossed. I climbed the narrow stairs to my small office, a room lit by a single window facing Maple Lake. Inside, the leather box that held my most important documents waited on the shelf. I carried it to the desk and opened it with deliberate calm. One by one, I reviewed each paper. The deed, crisp and official, with my name printed boldly. The final mortgage statement marked paid in full. Receipts for every repair I completed throughout the years, most done with my own hands. My meticulous notes filled page after page of the worn notebook I had kept since Daniel and I first bought the land. Seeing everything laid out reminded me that this house was not an accident, not a shared effort, not a community project. It was mine. I spent an hour scanning each document and saving digital copies. Then I backed them up again, this time to a secure storage account. My hands moved steadily, without hesitation, guided by a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. I knew I was preparing for something, though I did not yet fully understand the scale of it. When I called Joan later that morning, her voice immediately sharpened with concern. She had known me long enough to recognize when my calm meant trouble. She listened without interrupting, then promised to give me the number of a lawyer who specialized in property and elder law. Within an hour, I had the contact for attorney Robert Hale and an appointment scheduled for the next day. Grace Porter arrived shortly after noon. She was a realtor known in the region for handling confidential property transactions, especially for older homeowners who valued privacy. She walked through the house with practiced eyes, noting everything from the timber beams to the vintage stone fireplace. She spoke softly, describing how a quiet sale worked, how no signs would be posted and no public listings made. Only pre-approved buyers would see the property, and only under the strictest discretion. I appreciated her precision. It matched the quiet resolve forming inside me. Meanwhile, David and Claire moved through the house with a different kind of energy. They whispered more. They lingered around my office door. They stepped away quickly whenever I entered a room. Claire walked with the calculated steps of someone inventorying every object. I watched without reacting. Each moment added to the silent puzzle taking shape in my mind. Before the evening ended, I updated the locks on my filing cabinet, changed the password on my email, and installed 2 small cameras in the hallway and living room. They were tiny enough to be mistaken for holiday decorations. I tested the recordings and sent backup links to Robert, though he had not even visited yet. Something told me I would need more than memory to defend myself. Later that night, while passing the kitchen, I heard voices low and urgent. David's tone was strained. Claire's was sharp, clipped, the way it became when she was trying to steady him while pushing him forward. Their words were muffled, but I caught enough to understand. They were talking about paperwork, signatures, and the need to act before I did something unexpected. They had no idea how late they were. I returned to my office and opened my notebook. On a clean page, I wrote 3 words: secure the house. Then I closed it, placed my hand on top of the leather box, and let the silence settle again. The first steps had already begun. If you are feeling the shift and the story is getting under your skin, comment number 3 so I know you are still watching with me. Now let us move forward to chapter 4. The morning arrived under a sky the color of worn slate, the kind of cold New England gray that seemed to press down on the rooftops. I woke earlier than usual, not out of restlessness but out of purpose. The house was quiet, too quiet, and every footstep echoed the truth that things inside these walls had shifted. My chest held a weight that was not quite grief and not quite anger, something suspended between the two. Yet my mind felt sharp, clear, ready. Attorney Robert Hale arrived at 9 o'clock exactly, walking up the snowy path with the confidence of someone who understood the law and the people capable of breaking it. I opened the door before he could knock. He stepped inside his side, brushing the snow from his coat, already scanning the interior with a professional eye. I led him to the dining table where I had arranged every document in precise order. The room felt colder than it should have, though the heat was running. He studied each paper with care, the deed with my name, the mortgage payoff stamped and dated, the tax receipts, the years of home maintenance documented in my own handwriting. He nodded more than once, confirming everything was in perfect shape. He explained the advantages of placing the house into a revocable living trust to protect it from unauthorized claims. His voice was steady, almost gentle, but his eyes revealed he had seen this type of situation before. Elder financial manipulation, family entitlement, the quiet cruelty that people prefer not to speak of. I listened, absorbing each recommendation, and agreed to proceed. He promised the documents would be prepared swiftly. After Robert left, a kind of heavy stillness filled the house, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming next. Not long after, Grace Porter returned, carrying her tablet and a thick folder. She walked through the house again, this time taking photos and notes, assessing the property with a professional's precision. She explained that the location near Maple Lake made the house desirable for high-end seasonal buyers. She outlined how a private sale would work, emphasizing discretion. No listings, no signs, no unnecessary exposure, only vetted buyers who valued privacy. Her tone was calm, confident, exactly what I needed to hear. Yet while Grace spoke, I caught movement at the top of the stairs, the faint shadow of Claire, watching from above, pretending not to observe us. The air tightened. She was beginning to sense something she could not name. Throughout the day, David retreated into his own world, pacing the backyard on long phone calls that ended abruptly whenever I approached. His shoulders hunched, his jaw tense, his eyes darting with a kind of urgency that unsettled me. Claire moved differently as well. She walked from room to room, as if memorizing each corner. I noticed drawers left slightly ajar, small items shifted out of place, the unmistakable signs of someone searching without permission. Late that afternoon, I stepped outside to retrieve a package. A neighbor, Margaret Sloan, approached with the concerned frown of someone who had debated whether to speak. She mentioned she had seen David speaking with Ralph Connors behind the general store. Ralph, a man everyone in town knew for lending money to people running out of time. Hearing his name chilled me more than the winter wind. It explained far too much. Inside, I sat at my desk and realized that all my early efforts, consulting a lawyer, meeting the realtor, reorganizing documents, were only the first thin layer of protection. David and Claire were deeper in trouble than I had suspected, and desperation could push people into dangerous choices. I secured my files again, locked the cabinet, checked the hidden cameras, and took a slow breath. The house seemed darker now, though the lamps were still on. Snow drifted past the windows like silent reminders that time was moving. I wrote in my notebook, Stage 2, move fast. The words steadied me. The first attempts had begun, but the real storm was still coming. If the twists are beginning to surprise you and you want to see what unfolds next, comment number 4 below to stay connected. Now let us continue into Chapter 5. The morning arrived with a chill that felt deeper than weather, a cold that had settled into the house itself. I moved through the hallway with the sense that every corner was holding its breath. The floor creaked under my steps, familiar, yet strangely accusing, as if the home I had built no longer recognized the people inside it. The silence between us had grown dense. Even the ticking clock in the living room sounded sharper than usual. When I reached the kitchen, David and Claire were already there. They spoke in low, tense murmurs that stopped the moment I stepped in. Their movements felt rehearsed, the way people behave when they have something to hide. Claire avoided my eyes, focusing instead on her mug. David paced near the window, the muscles in his jaw tightening with each turn. I sensed that whatever had been simmering beneath the surface was close to boiling over. Later that morning, I went to my office to organize the documents Robert and Grace had asked for. While arranging them, I sensed someone behind me. When I turned, David was standing at the doorway, staring at the stack of papers. His expression was unsettled, almost demanding. He stepped closer, eyes fixed on the legal envelopes bearing the printed name of Robert's law firm. He asked what I was signing. His voice was controlled but strained, as if he was trying to sound casual but could not keep his agitation hidden. I answered calmly, keeping my tone steady. It did not matter what I said. He would have found a reason to doubt it. He pressed harder, trying to see the documents. His agitation grew with every second, and I saw clearly that this was not simple curiosity. This was fear disguised as authority. Before I could answer again, Claire appeared and positioned herself beside him. Her voice carried a sweetness that felt sharpened at the edges. She suggested that a family should be open about important decisions. Her words were smooth, but the intent was unmistakable. She wanted access. She wanted control. I refused politely, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The kitchen's soft winter light felt harsher, bouncing off the tension filling the space. That afternoon, I met with Grace and Robert separately. Grace confirmed a private showing with potential buyers. Robert informed me that the trust documents were ready for signature. Their updates meant momentum. I felt a quiet steadiness settle in my chest. The plan was moving forward. When I returned home, I found David in my office again. This time he was holding one of the envelopes. Claire stood behind him, and the look on her face told me they had put the pieces together. They knew I was preparing to sell the house. The shift in David's posture was immediate. He demanded answers. Claire added accusations, claiming I could not make such a choice on my own. Their voices rose with a desperation that bordered on panic. I let them speak until the anger in the room felt like heat. Then I answered with the truth. The house was mine. Every payment, every signature, every repair had been done by my hands. Their outrage faltered when confronted with that simple reality. For a moment, even Claire looked unsure. The moment of silence did not last. My phone rang. Robert's name appeared. I stepped aside and answered. His voice was grave as he explained that the bank had flagged a recent attempt to secure a loan using my name, complete with a forged signature. The attempt had failed, but the warning was clear. I looked up from the phone and saw both of them frozen, their faces pale. The truth did not need to be spoken aloud. It hung in the air, undeniable. I ended the call, placed the phone on the table, and walked past them without a word. I closed the office door behind me, feeling the weight of finality settle on my shoulders. The breaking point had arrived, and nothing would be the same again. The house felt impossibly still after the confrontation, as if every room had folded inward to shelter itself from what had been said. I closed the office door slowly and let the silence settle around me, dense and heavy. For the first time in years, the house no longer felt like my refuge. It felt like a battlefield abandoned after the last cannon had fired, with the smoke still hanging in the air. I sat at my desk, letting the quiet press against me until my breathing steadied. Somewhere in the distance, a branch scraped against the window, a thin reminder that the world outside continued even when everything inside felt shattered. I thought back over the years that led to this moment, each memory drifting forward like pages from a book I no longer belonged to. I remembered the early mornings when I worked double shifts to keep the roof over our heads. I remembered building the house with Daniel, the pride we felt laying the first boards, the promise it held for our future. I remembered raising David alone after losing Daniel, doing everything I could to be both anchor and lighthouse. All of it felt distant now, as if it belonged to another lifetime. What remained was the truth. The boy I raised had become a man who crossed a line I could never uncross. My phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. It was Robert. His voice carried the firmness of someone who had handled many betrayals disguised as family conflicts. He explained that the forged loan attempt had been officially blocked and documented. The evidence was complete. If I wanted to pursue legal action, the path was open. He urged caution, reminding me that people who take such risks can become unpredictable when they fail. I thanked him, my voice steady, though something inside me that tightened as I realized how deep the betrayal ran. Not long after, Grace called. She spoke with the calm professionalism that had become strangely comforting to me. The buyers wanted to finalize the purchase within 2 days. Everything was ready. She asked gently whether I wished to continue with the sale. Her tone, respectful and cautious, made the question feel heavier than it should have. I paused by the window as she waited for my answer. Outside, the backyard stretched beneath a soft blanket of snow, untouched except for the tracks of a deer wandering near the trees. The whiteness seemed pure, silent, and open, like a page waiting to be rewritten. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what life might feel like somewhere else, somewhere quiet, where the past did not echo through every corner of the house, a place where I could breathe without waiting for the next blow. After ending the call, I returned to the office to gather a few things. As I lifted my desk calendar, a loose sheet slipped out and fell to the floor. I picked it up and felt a cold heaviness settle in my stomach. It was an early draft of the loan application David had tried to submit, his handwriting scrawled beside places where he had practiced mimicking mine. It was dated weeks earlier than the recent attempt. This was not Claire's pressure. This was not a moment of desperation. This was intent. My son had planned to betray me long before he found the courage to say he was tired of seeing me. The truth settled over me like frost. I sat down, holding the paper, feeling something inside me finally shift into clarity. There were no more illusions left to protect, no more excuses to make, no more hope to cling to. The choice had already been made. I only needed to accept it. I gathered the items that still mattered to me: a photograph of Daniel, the silver box with letters he wrote, a watercolor David painted as a child, and my worn notebook. I left everything else untouched. This house no longer needed to hold my history. Before leaving the room, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Stage 3, leave." The words looked final, almost peaceful. I closed the cover, stood, and walked toward the stairs. The late afternoon light filtered through the window, glowing faintly against the wooden floor, guiding my steps downward. I understood then that my future would no longer be shaped by who I had protected. It would be shaped by who I chose to become. If you are still here and the intensity has you hooked, drop a number 6 in the comments so I know you are feeling every moment with me. Now, let us move into Chapter 7. The following morning rose with an uneasy stillness, a kind of quiet that felt heavier than any argument spoken aloud. The house seemed to retreat into itself, as though even the walls were bracing for what came next. I moved slowly through the hallway, noticing the faint echo of my footsteps, the coldness of the hardwood floor, and the unfamiliar emptiness that had crept into the rooms. It was the first morning since making my decision, and the weight of it pressed gently but firmly across my shoulders. I was not afraid, but I was undeniably changed. I spent the first hours preparing for the closing later that day. The last of my belongings sat in neatly labeled boxes, stacked against the wall like quiet witnesses. I kept only a few things: my husband Daniel's letters, a framed photograph from a summer long gone, and a small carved bird David had made as a child. Everything else I left behind without regret. I paused in the doorway of each room, not to mourn, but to acknowledge what had been. The home no longer held the warmth it once carried. It had transformed into a shell, waiting for new hands to define it. Downstairs, the behavior of David and Claire changed in a way that would have alarmed me years ago, but now only confirmed what I already understood. David hovered around the living room, but each time our eyes met, he turned away, guilty and uncertain. Claire carried herself with a tightness around her mouth, her steps abrupt, her movements abrupt with frustration. They avoided speaking altogether, but silence itself became a language, revealing more than words could. Outside, while placing a small box in my car, I ran into my neighbor, Martha. She approached with a hesitant expression, asking gently whether the rumors she had heard about trouble at home were true. I offered her a smile, soft and noncommittal, assuring her only that things were being handled. Her concern stung in its own way. It was a reminder that the fractures inside my home were no longer invisible. They had begun to seep into the world beyond these walls. Shortly after, my phone rang. It was Martin Cole, steady as ever. He informed me that the legal filings were moving forward quickly, the forged signature now part of an official report. He warned me that desperation often pushed people toward impulsive decisions and reminded me to stay cautious. I thanked him, absorbing the seriousness of his tone. He did not need to tell me David and Claire were frightened. Their behavior already made that clear. Not an hour later, the doorbell rang. 2 police officers stood on the porch, polite but firm, explaining that a complaint had been filed accusing me of selling the house without proper authority. I invited them inside without hesitation. The absurdity of the accusation did not surprise me. It was the kind of act people commit when they are drowning and willing to reach for anything, even if it pulls them under further. The officers reviewed every document: the deed with my name, the trust papers, the sale agreement, the tax clearance. They moved efficiently, exchanging glances as the truth became clear. The complaint held no ground. One of them mentioned gently that I had the right to pursue a false report claim if I wished. I nodded, but my heart felt strangely calm. There was no satisfaction in watching the collapse unfold, only inevitability. When the officers stepped back toward the entrance, David and Claire appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Claire's face contorted with anger as she attempted to argue, but the officers shut her down with quiet professionalism. David remained silent, slumped, his eyes hollow. It was clear the reality had finally struck him. After the door closed behind the officers, the house fell still again. A final kind of stillness, heavy yet clarifying. I stood by the window, watching snow drift lazily from the sky, each flake settling softly on the ground below. The consequences had begun, and none of us would emerge untouched. After the officers left, the house slowly settled into a deep and solemn quiet. It was not the same heavy silence that had haunted the rooms earlier in the week. This one felt more resigned, more truthful, as if the house finally understood which direction its future was heading. I stood near the center of the living room, looking at the empty spaces where furniture had once sat, and felt a calmness I had not experienced in months. The balance of power had shifted fully, and the weight that had pressed on my chest for so long had begun to ease. I knew the confrontation with the police was only the first ripple in the aftermath. There was still a long road to walk before I could close this chapter completely. I considered what needed to be done next, the steps I must take to finalize what had been set in motion. My emotions sat quietly in the background, not overwhelming, not chaotic, simply present. Grief and liberation, standing side by side like two old companions that had finally reached the same truth. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. It was Martin Cole. He spoke with the assured tone I had come to rely on, informing me that the investigative report now held full legal weight. The forged documents were undeniable, the evidence organized and secured. He assured me that from this point onward, any attempt from David or Claire to interfere would be stopped immediately. I thanked him, feeling the firm reassurance of someone who knew how to bring structure to chaos. Not long after, Grace called. She had arranged everything with the buyers, and the final signing was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the title office. Her voice was warm, steady, and careful. She asked whether I wanted her present during the handover. I told her I would attend alone. It felt important to close the door myself, without anyone shielding me from the weight of finality. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching small patterns of light reflect off the glass. A tide of memories came and went. Years of raising David, nights spent sick with worry or beaming with pride. I acknowledged each memory without trying to rewrite any of them. Some things had simply ended, and acceptance was quieter than I expected. Footsteps approached. Claire appeared in the doorway, her expression strained but attempting softness. She spoke carefully, shifting between blame and an imitation of regret. I listened without engaging. Her words slid past me like water against glass, unable to penetrate. Whatever power her voice once held had long dissolved. When she paused, I stated gently that my decisions were final. From today onward, all matters would be handled through my lawyer. Her face hardened, but I did not flinch. The line between us had been drawn with absolute clarity. I moved through the house one last time, checking each room with a final detached glance. I gathered my documents, slipped them into a leather folder, and zipped my coat. The air near the front door felt crisp, almost expectant. Outside, fresh snow rested on the porch like an untouched beginning. I stood still for a moment, breathing in the cold air, letting its purity wash through me. Peace, I realized, was not something to be negotiated. It was something to reclaim. With that, I closed the door behind me. The sound was soft, firm, and full of meaning. If you are still watching and ready to see how everything finally comes together, comment number 8 below to let me know you are staying until the end. Now, let us step into the conclusion of this story. The morning of the closing arrived with a pale, winter stillness hanging over Vermont. I moved through the empty house with steady steps, gathering the last items I intended to take with me. The spaces that once held years of memories now felt like hollow containers, stripped of warmth and meaning. There was a gentle ache in acknowledging the end of something so large, yet relief rose quietly beneath it. I had already released this place in my heart. At the title office, everything proceeded with practiced efficiency. Grace greeted me with a reassuring nod, and the buyers signed their documents with an eagerness that almost softened the moment. I added my signature where needed, each line sealing the final separation between myself and the house. When it was done, the funds transferred directly into the trust Martin had prepared. The process felt clean, decisive, almost ceremonial. Martin informed me afterward that the civil filings against David and Claire were officially submitted. They no longer had any legal standing to challenge the sale or access my accounts. He spoke of next steps, protections, and timelines, but I felt myself already drifting away from the weight of it all. Their chaos no longer belonged to me. Later, I returned to the house briefly to retrieve a single item, the small silver box containing Daniel's letters. The empty rooms echoed each footstep. Nothing in them asked me to stay. Outside, Margaret waited with 2 warm coffees, offering a quiet look of understanding. I accepted the cup, grateful for her steady presence. Before driving away, I saw a final message from David appear on my phone. I read it only long enough to know it held nothing I needed. Then I blocked the number, exhaling softly as if releasing the last thread tying me to old wounds. The road ahead curved along the frozen lake, carrying me toward a cabin I had rented in a small, peaceful town. When I arrived, I placed Daniel's letters on a new shelf, lit a small fire, and sat by the window as gentle snow began to fall. For the first time in years, the silence felt like home. The first mornings in my new cabin felt almost unreal, as if silence itself had been waiting for me. The air was colder here, sharper, carrying the faint scent of pine drifting down from the woods behind the property. When the sun rose, it spread a soft gold across the snow, turning the frozen lake in the distance into a sheet of quiet light. I stepped outside each day with a cup of coffee and let the stillness wrap around me like something sacred. For the first time in years, nothing in my surroundings demanded anything of me. No footsteps upstairs, no tense glances, no hesitation about where I belonged. Inside, the cabin held its own comfort. The small fireplace crackled with a warmth that felt earned. The wooden floors creaked softly beneath my steps, not as complaints but as gentle acknowledgments of presence. I had space again, space in my home, space in my thoughts, and space in my heart. It reminded me how long I had existed in a cramped emotional corner without realizing it. I thought often about the road that brought me here. I did not regret what I had done. I regretted only how long it took me to act. My kindness had been stretched thin over years of excuses, years of believing patience could fix what people refused to repair themselves. Selling the house was not revenge. It was reclamation. Filing charges was not spite. It was clarity. Leaving Maple Lake was not escape. It was rebirth. There were moments when memories of David and Claire drifted in, not as wounds, but as reminders. I no longer felt anger toward them, only distance. There comes a point when someone chooses who they want to be, and your only role left is to accept their choice and free yourself from the weight of it. I accepted it. I released it. I chose peace over attachment, dignity over obligation. Each day in this new place settled the truth deeper in me. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet decision to walk away, even when your heart trembles. Sometimes it is choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. I had spent so long believing endurance was virtue that I forgot boundaries are too. On the third evening, I stood on the porch and watched the snow fall in slow, drifting lines. The world felt clean, as if winter itself was giving me permission to start again. I closed my eyes and let the cold settle on my skin. It did not sting. it awakened. I had walked away from a life that no longer saw me, and in doing so, I stepped into one that finally did. There are moments in life when walking away becomes the most courageous act a person can choose, not out of anger, but out of recognition. Recognition that peace is worth protecting, that dignity is worth guarding, and that silence can sometimes speak louder than devotion ever did. When the familiar walls that once felt like home turn into reminders of exhaustion, stepping beyond them becomes an act of quiet rebirth. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It means honoring the lesson, carrying the strength, and allowing oneself the freedom to begin again. And in that beginning, there is clarity, there is softness, there is a life no longer shaped by what was taken, but by what one finally claimed. The right to breathe without permission. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched something in you, feel free to share your thoughts below, follow the channel, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and renewal.